Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the Lost Mary of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy flying solo on a reconnaissance mission for the black metal guy, stepping in on his territory, so to speak. So a couple weeks ago, I brought a record to the show that I was very excited about when I first heard of it, which was the new Imperial Crystalline Entombment record, some 20 years on from the debut. Ancient Glacial Resurgence came out this year, 2023, on Debemur Morti, the long-awaited and probably unanticipated follow-up to 2004's apocalyptic End in White. If you guys haven't heard that review, go back a couple episodes, check it out. It's a completely awesome record, hilariously fun and extreme in all the ways that make covering this kind of music worthwhile. So I am really pleased to have the opportunity to speak to the one and only Ron Vento of Imperial Crystalline Entombment, Aurora Borealis, and others. Ron, how are you doing tonight?
Man, I'm doing great, and let me just say thanks for having me on. I heard that original podcast you guys did. It was awesome, and I'm excited to be here, so I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks a lot, man. You reached out to us after the episode came out, and it was just awesome to hear from you because I've been listening to I.C.E. and Aurora Borealis for a really long time. So it's great to have this opportunity.
Well, I had to reach out because I just thought that you guys really understood the record even more so than lots of people that were reviewing it, lots of people that were listening to it, and I was like, man, these guys really get it. So I just had to reach out to you guys. Thanks,
man. I mean, that's a tremendous compliment. We always like to hear when we've hit the mark on this stuff because we love talking about it. I guess the first question is. I guess it's sort of multi-layered. So 20 years later for I.C.E. I guess we'll kind of start now and then we'll work backward. Why the 20-year gap and, why come back to the project?
So there's a bit of a story behind that. We did the record. It came out on Crash Music. I guess it was Pavement, but we had a lot of issues. We tried to, collect our checks that we were supposed to get. We had a lot of issues with that label. I threatened lawsuits against him. It was just a big pain in the butt. And then, we sort of all made that record, a little bit frustrated with it. And then we just all started doing our own bands. We all had our own projects going on. And then, we had, over the years, we had always had interest in re-releasing it because you probably know the CDs were going for a crazy amount of money and there were only so many of them. And we just couldn't find the right people that we wanted because it was kind of cult at that point and we didn't want to release it on some, some label that it didn't really fit it.
Not another Crash instance.
We got a contact from, it's so crazy, we got contacted from 3 different labels at once, and there was this kind of obscure label, and that's not meant in a bad way, it's a good way. It's called IXOIL Records, or I think it's IXOIL, I get the letters confused, but he was like, listen man, I'd like to do a super, super limited run on this, clear vinyl, just do it the right way, and we thought that he was the right guy because he was so cult and so underground himself, and we said, okay, yeah, sure, do the re-release, and that thing sold out in like a matter of hours, and we knew the interest was there, but as soon as that happened, we were like, man, we gotta put this thing into works and get a new record going on. And it's funny because I had already started writing some black metal songs prior to that, and so I just sort of shaped them into I.C.E. And just like with the first I.C.E. record, it came together. This stuff comes together so fast because it's not super complex, it's not super hard to do, and man, we just kind of kicked it off with that. After that thing got kicked out, we were just like, let's just follow up on it, and then we got the offer from the new label, and they were killer, and everything just sort of fell into place, and it was just the right time, the right people, and everything just worked out.
Yeah, so that's interesting. That was a question I was going to have, which was, whether this record, if you'd had bits and pieces, sort of over that 20-year period where you're like, oh, man, if I ever come back to this would be great for I.C.E. But it sounds like the writing and recording process was like pretty immediate and pretty straightforward.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I always tell people we wrote the first Ice record in. I always tell people like 3 days, and that's a little bit It's a little bit exaggeratory. It was probably more like a week, but we put really no. With our other bands, it's so technical and it's a process, and with Ice, we just had fun, and it was almost like a joke to begin with. We said, okay, there's only going to be blast beats on this record. There's not going to be any other beats except blast beats. But that sort of didn't happen because the drummer at the time, he started to play regular beats, and I kind of didn't like it because it was supposed to be just like almost a parody to the black metal. It was supposed to be only blast beats, but that sort of fell apart. And then it's like, okay, what are all the guys doing? Well, they're all dressing in black and wearing spikes. What can we do? Well, we'll just dress in all white and we'll wear robes. And everything was the opposite, and it was just fun. But so this record, I would say I wrote. There were bits and pieces of it that were left out of Aurora because they were too black metal, and I just hung on to riffs here and there, and so I threw a couple of those together. But generally, I would write 3-4 riffs a day. I mean, within 2 days, I'll have a song for Ice, which is, pretty fast paced because with Aurora, it takes me weeks to do a song.
Mm-hmm. So Ice essentially began as a sort of low pressure opportunity, because like with Aurora and with a lot of the other associated bands with the original lineup, a lot of that tends to be sort of technical or progressive music, and Ice was just something where we can just have fun making a black metal record and it can be done and we don't have to torture ourselves with it. Is that the vibe?
Yeah, exactly. We were just kids sitting around in a room and thinking about what else could we do besides our main stuff, and it all started as a joke. And then we made that 3-song demo, and that was the part that was written in a couple days, and we recorded it, and then we got so much interest in it, and it was like, yeah, we gotta follow this through with the we gotta follow this through with a real record. And then so that's when we put a little bit more into it, but at the same time it was only a week, like literally a week, and it was low pressure, like you said, and it was just all about having fun and writing some raw black metal, because none of our other bands were raw black metal. And I say raw black metal, but it's not truly raw black. It's not Burzum, you know what I mean? It's not. Yeah. It's not.
But no, something aggressive and heavy and extreme.
Right, and it doesn't have to be so technical. Some of those riffs repeat 3 or 4 times, and they're literally 4 notes to a riff, and it's just fun, really.
Yeah, I think that's one of the cool things about Ice is the immediacy of it, especially as black metal. It's so interesting. We talked about it on the show about hearing this stuff almost unstuck from time. This style that you were playing in 2004 that, people would call it Norsecore or something, this really blast beat oriented, aggressive style of black metal is just not that common anymore. So to hear it again 20 years later in a new context is really interesting.
And we tried to maintain some of that original feel and sound, and it's just like I said, simple riffs, and you put a nice little melody on top of it, and maybe you invert some chords here and there, create some dissonance, and it's all straightforward. And we tried to maintain some of that with the new record. I feel like it maintained it pretty well. A lot of people have said, man, it really picked up right where it left off.
I would agree. I think that it sounds like remarkably contiguous from the first record, and that's really impressive. 20 years later, that it feels like it just picks up directly where it leaves off, as you said. So, in terms of the writing process, was this stuff that you guys were sort of like writing and tracking at the same time?
No.
Okay.
So what happens is I generally write all the riffs. I'll write all the riffs for everything. The original record, it was myself and another guy that wrote all the riffs, and we sat in a room and we just wrote the riffs really fast. But on this one, I wrote all the riffs. The vocalist actually did some stuff on a keyboard, and then I transposed it over to guitar, so he actually contributed a little bit from the keyboard. But it's generally just I write all the riffs, and then I'll send them out to the drummer. The drummer will start sending me ideas back, and then from there I'll start, trying to shape it a little more into black metal, because he's a death metal guy himself, and I'll shape it into black metal a little bit, but he's getting really good at that. So I don't really have to do too much with the guys. I just send out riffs and let the guys work, and then I'll just fix stuff up if I have to. And with the vocalist, man, by the time I hand it to him, he's just the utmost. I mean, he's a beast, man. He's a professional, and I was trying to send him some lyrical ideas, and he said, "Man, I'm already done." I was like, well, all right.
Oh, that's that. Are you telling me you got a vocalist that's actually excited to work and do things for the band? Man, you hold on to him.
It's pretty incredible because you're right. Sometimes you have to stay on their butts, and then you have to be like, listen, man, are you gonna do it? 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 But this guy, he's been around forever, and I think he's one of the top guys in all of death metal, or death or black metal for that matter. I just always look up to his work and really respect what he does, and just the fact that he's that fast at working as well. I mean, that's why these ICE records are so easy to deliver, because we all love what we're doing and we're all fast.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. I appreciate the sort of lightning in a bottle energy of these records. It's like you can tell that they are written and laid down quickly, and that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean that it's rushed. It means that it's a burst of enthusiasm and energy, and it just goes into the product immediately.
Well, yeah, you're right, and it is that way too. Is exactly what you said, because we don't even spend a long time recording it. We make sure the parts are right. Don't get me wrong; like we make sure everything's meticulously laid out and it's tight. But it's not something where I'll sit there and scrutinize a guitar part for 25 minutes to make sure that it's flawless. It's black metal still, so it can be a little bit looser than a technical death metal record. So we don't scrutinize every single thing with this project.
Yeah, no, I mean, you really maintain the spirit well. So leading on from something you said, talking about your drummer being more of a death metal guy, that goes to something we were talking about on the show where we reviewed the record. So especially when the first ICE record came out, the metal scene has changed so much in the past 20 years. It's hard to understate, hard to overstate just how dramatically things have shifted.
Right.
But back in 2004, which was right around when I was getting into extreme metal as a kid, as I said on that episode, being a guy that was into black metal in the US was still kind of unusual. And nowadays, all the guys younger than me pretty much grew up with black metal being a standard part of listening habits. But back in 2004, there were a lot of situations where black metal bands were essentially composed of death metal guys trying to figure this black metal thing out. So how do you feel as a guy who's working with a lot of guys from the death metal scene and who probably has more of a foot in the tech death scene overall because of Aurora Borealis? How do you think that affects the approach to doing this sort of stripped down music where it sort of runs at cross purposes to the stuff that you usually do?
Yeah, well, I mean, like going back to what you said just a second ago, too, before we get to that, you're right. Back in the day, it was very rare to find American guys doing black metal. I mean, you had a couple. You had like bands like, I don't even remember these guys, like Cult of Azazel, and I think there was a band called Crimson Moon, maybe. Yeah, so there was a couple guys doing it, but they were doing it like they were still aggressive, but they weren't that raw. Like some of my favorite music ever recorded, like in the history of all metal, are bands like Dark Funeral, like Marduk, like Cythereal. Like Cythereal is so great to me. And I like those guys. Like when I first started listening to metal, I always said I wanted to play in a black metal band, and it just came out like sort of Aurora because I was also like in so much into a lot of death metal stuff. But I mean, for me, it was just natural because some of my favorite music were those bands from Europe, that melodic, atmospheric death metal. You called out one on your podcast, I believe, or one of you guys did, and said there's some dissection influence in there. And I mean, yeah, come on, man. Like Storm of the Lightsbane, like, I mean, the Somber Lane, those are phenomenal early records, and those are heavily influencing what I did with ICE as well. But yeah, as far as how it influences a record now, it's almost like, we're also see, my guys still don't listen to black metal that much, so their writing process is not really influenced by a lot of this stuff. But you're right, now black metal is everywhere. It's almost sort of the thing to do now. Everyone has a side metal, black metal project. Everyone's got this, everyone's got that. But I think if you're not in it from the start, you're not going to get that feel like you were talking about. You know, you're not going to get that feel, and it's just some sort of generic form of black metal, and that's what I hear a lot of today, just generic form of black metal. So for me, I just always go back to my roots, and you know, I'll still play those first 3 Ethereal records, and I'll still play the early Dark Funeral records, and even the latest Dark Funeral records. I love that record, you know. But that's how I kind of draw influence from that when I write in my process.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, because I think that seizes on something important, which is that, you know, USBM. You know, nowadays, especially now that extreme metal has permeated the internet a lot more, it becomes very easy for, you know, just a guy in his bedroom now to do stuff that sounds Finnish or sounds French. Because they have access to all that stuff through YouTube and file sharing and Spotify. But, you know, back in the 90s and early 2000s, before, you know, it was quite so accessible, a lot of people were just drawing off what they had. And I think as a result, a lot of those USBM bands from that era, you know, like you were saying, Cult of Azazel, Thornspawn, stuff like that, they've got kind of a unique sound because they're just not as informed by Euro black metal ideas as they would be later. It was a sort of lost in translation thing that ended up creating a sound of its own.
Yeah, you're right. Those dudes don't sound quite European. They don't sound like the Ethereals or the Dark Funerals. They do have a unique sound, and I thought those were pretty good bands. I just preferred the energy and the aggression. To me, it's all about speed and aggression. I hesitate to call myself black metal because I don't buy into the philosophy of black metal, which is why you see that sort of comic book approach to I.C.E, because we're not into that philosophy of black metal. Mm-hmm. But those bands, they do have that unique kind of vibe because they were blending sort of an American sound with sort of a European sound. But see, I used to tape trade with all those black metal bands from Europe, and they lived in my tape player, and that's what I was drawing influence from, you know. I was deep into it. But also thrash metal, too. I was deep into the European thrash metal. Quite frankly, I just enjoy the European scene a lot more than the American scene. I think the American scene has the death metal under wraps, like you said, but I'm not 100% into the death metal, you know.
No, I definitely understand. Well, speaking of influences, one that was always spoken of when it comes to you guys was Immortal as being central. Like, a lot of old reviews of you guys always suggested that, like, Immortal was paramount, which I think, at least to my ear, clearly Immortal is important, but your riffs don't sound like Immortal riffs. It's kind of everything else they do. You know, it's sort of structural ideas and the timbres that come through. So what do you think of Immortal, and are they as crucial to I.C.E as everyone thinks?
I mean, man, listen, the words you just spoke are so accurate. So Immortal are cool, right? Like, people are comparing us to Immortal because they got the ice vibe. They got the battles in the north. They got the blizzard beasts. And I think they're overlooking the bigger picture. Like, they're just seeing the facade of icy snow, and they're just comparing us to that. But that's not what we do. We don't play Immortal. There's a riff off a song called Hypothermic Possession, which we do, where it's a very Immortal style riff. And if you're talking about Immortal style riffs, it's really the only riff that I wrote that I can say, yes, that's an Immortal riff. The rest, I don't consider us writing Immortal riffs at all. But you're right, the structures of Immortal, the Immortals sort of have, like, in their middle era records, they did choruses, and they did things that a lot of bands weren't doing, and that's what we tried to do. We tried to have choruses in black metal, something that the people could say, okay, this part happened 3 times already. And I think Immortal did that in their middle era days. And so when you talk about the structure of Immortal, I think that's what you mean, because you're right, we don't sound like Immortal, but yet we're always compared to Immortal nonstop. It's not frustrating, because Immortal's great. Immortal's a great band, and you know, they're still making good records, but we definitely don't sound like Immortal, that's for sure.
No, but it's funny because you were talking about the European thrash thing. That's another way you kind of get to that Immortal comparison, is because they always maintain such a presence of that very traditional Euro thrash style. Well,
I think it has a lot to do with the guitar player for that band. Like, you could tell he's you can tell he listens to a lot of other stuff. I mean, he's not just a death metal or black metal guy. He's a rock star in his own right, and he's out there listening to rock and roll and, you know, what do they call it, like the black and roll and the death roll and all this other stuff. And that's why he maintains that he has some of those thrashier riffs in his stuff, because when I listen to middle to later Immortal, it's not pure black metal. It's, you know, if you go to the like pure Holocaust, that might be a pure black metal record, but after that they start to have actual riffs. You know?
Yeah, they start to fold in more and more kind of 80s heavy metal as they proceed.
Yeah, exactly.
something that really surprised me when we were just talking back and forth on Facebook when you first reached out was you were talking about how there's another Ice record in the works. I don't know. I just assumed for some reason this would be some 20-year resurrection, and I don't know, you guys would maybe come back in 20 years, but you're turning around doing another one pretty quickly?
Well, it's crazy, man. Like, we all have these serious bands we do where we put our lifeblood into it, and we turn around and we release these great music videos, and the response isn't the same. It's like the people sort of tell you what they want, and it seems like, I mean, we released that record and it got 35,000 plays in a month, and then YouTube hit 20,000. I mean, we're up to 50-60,000 plays, and it's been out for 1 month. None of our other bands have done that. So I was so hyped up coming off the writing of the last Ice record, it just sort of rolled into the next one. And I'll tell you something crazy, man. Like, I've had some like turmoil in my life, so like what I've done is sort of wrap that up into staying occupied and keeping myself busy. I've got the entire Aurora record already written, and we just had that come out last November, and I've got 5 to 6 songs of the new Ice record already written as well. And quite frankly, that could have been done already, but we're going to take this thing, there's a chance we're going to take this thing live, so we started to turn it over into like rehearsals and things like that. Otherwise that whole record will be done already. That really surprised me when you told me that, but I'm super excited.
I really love the idea of Ice coming back as a band that releases regularly. I mean, it never was that. So really just transforming into that. The idea of playing it live is super interesting. I actually meant to ask you, had Ice ever done any live performances?
No, it was just a project that we did, recorded it, it got released, and it just was done that fast. It was over with all that issues with the record label, and we all just went gung-ho with our other bands, and so that never got put out live. I mean, quite frankly, I stopped playing live a long time ago because I just wasn't into it anymore after doing so much with. I was in a black metal band in Atlanta called the Stragus Nosferatus, and we played and toured and did all this other stuff, and I got kind of sick of it. And Mike, my singer, he got sick of it too. And it's just like this is all like it's becoming like something that's our main project, and we're like, this needs to go live because, we're all like, our first show that we were offered right after the record came out. Keep in mind, this is a 20-year hiatus. Our first show was Hellfest over in France. Like, you're talking about like the biggest festival in the world, and we're trying to figure out a way that we can get over there and do that and make it happen, but we're trying to put some string together, some other stuff while we're over there to make it worth going. And we think we're going to take this thing live, man, and we already started rehearsing it. We picked up another guitar player just for the live stuff, obviously, because there's so many guitar parts. We can't get away with one guitar player. That would be impossible. So we are hoping that you're going to see it live this coming year, 2024.
Just for, I don't know, sake of clarification, I guess. So would you be interested in making Ice like sort of a full-time live band, or would it be like just an isolated festival type thing?
No, well, of course we love the festivals, and that's what we would like to do the most, but it's not going to be something that tours for 6 months out of the year, because we all have like our real lives too, like, I mean, I run a recording studio every day of my life. That's what I do for a living. We all have our legitimate stuff too, but we would like to start. Of course, we would like to start playing festivals, but if we can string together some dates around festivals, it wouldn't be a full-time thing, but it would be like maybe we could put some stuff together to make sure we're out there so people can see us, because, man, we get like nonstop, hey, when are you going to play live? Play live, play live, play live, play live. And it will be kind of fun. It will be kind of fun to play live because we're going to try to bring this imagery that we have to the stage. And it's
well, you have
tricky.
to.
Yeah, it's going to be tricky, but we think we can do it. We think we can do it, and we think we can do it, the right way within a reasonable budget. I mean, we're not going to go blow $50,000 on stuff, but we think that we can do it in a pretty cool way and still maintain a nice little image live.
Definitely. I mean, Ice live without the whole look just would not be the same. I mean, so much work has been put into that aesthetic. So. I guess not to dwell on it, but that 20-year period, were you aware of, I mean, you must have been in some sense, how how much of a weird little cult item that first record had become. I know that you guys all moved on and did other things, but I.C.E always kind of stuck out in my brain as like a really fascinating artifact of what I call kind of early internet metal scene, because where that really blew up was on forums and people talking to each other on.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. Like after like the first 5 or 6 or 7 years that went by, we started noticing that people were really that CD had become really highly sought after, and we started noticing the price going up and up and up and up and up. It was $20 and $30 and $40 and $50, and then I mean there was a little stretch where people were paying somewhere between $80 to $100 for that disc. So we knew people wanted it, and it was definitely cool to see that happen, and that's what kind of I think gave it the cult status, because it was so hard to get. It was one of those items where if you had it, you weren't getting rid of it. So they didn't come up for auction that much. They didn't come up for sale that much. So we sort of knew it was maintaining or developing the cult status. And I always thought that was really, really cool, which is why we never re-released it on CD. We never did anything because we sort of liked that cult status. And then that record label IXIOL, they re-released it, and we thought that was the right one because they were also cult and people really dug the stuff that they were doing.
Yeah, it is awesome to hear that re-release got so much attention. And it's interesting to think that sort of like, I think we talked about that on that show, the idea that, something sort of must have prompted you guys to spring back into action. So it's cool to hear that it was that like early success there.
Well, and not to cut you off real quick, but just for the heads up for people that are like, because that re-release of that record on vinyl, it was printed such a limited version. People, like I said, it sold out in like a matter of hours, and people are hitting me every day trying to figure it out. Like, can I get one? No, you can't get one. But the cool thing is, the label next week is re-releasing it again with a white vinyl. Still,
awesome.
Yeah, super limited still, so it's still going to be super hard to get. But so if anybody's listening and they want to jump on that, it's coming out. So you're going to have the clear vinyl that already came out, and you're going to have the white vinyl, which is coming out. And our current label is going to re-release it on. We finally struck a deal to re-release it on CD and cassette as well. So if you got the original ones, you got something special. But it's all coming out. It's going to be much more easily accessible to people here very soon.
That's awesome to hear, man. It's so weird and so cool that a project like this is coming back and doing that well. Especially in today's market, which is just so sort of difficult to navigate unless you're really savvy about how everything goes.
Well, like you said, there's so many people just doing it from behind their computer, and that's a problem. You talked about the scene changing so much a little while ago, and you're right, man. The problem is now. A long time ago, you kind of had to be good because when you went into a studio, it cost thousands of dollars, and you weren't going in if you were really bad. And if you got signed, you were probably pretty good because record labels were. And now you got like a trillion kids behind their computer creating black metal, creating death metal, creating this, using the drum machines, doing this, doing that, and it's so saturated. And I'm not talking crap about the scene or whatever, but it's like you've got to really, like you said, navigate it. And find the good stuff, because for every 50 you find, there's one good one now, as opposed to for every 2 there was one good one a long time ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's definitely a conversation. I don't think you're being antagonistic to the scene there. I mean, with the popularization of like easy, accessible home recording software has naturally resulted in just like a glut of stuff that isn't necessarily worthwhile. And that's sort of. That shift started to occur really not too long after the first I.C.E record came out. But you guys were, that was all recorded by you, right?
Yeah, everything I've ever done in my life, except the first 2 records of Aurora, I've recorded. So my studio's grown over the years. It started in a house just like everyone else, and then and now it's booked months in advance all the time. We don't only do metal, we do everything here, but everything I've ever recorded has been all my albums have been done by me except the first 2 Aurora records.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. So how do you think, especially as someone who's been so inside recording to an unusual degree for so many years, how do you think that dynamic has changed? You know, the whole, it's, you know, I'm a guy who, some of my stuff I've recorded myself. Sometimes when I want something more polished, I'll go to a studio. Where do you think the old school style of recording studio, where does that fit in to the modern music production process, now that there is this huge ability for people to record on their own?
Yeah, the problem is there's still a need for it because like I said, I'm booked all the time, and I have a fairly old school style. Of course, I'm on Pro Tools, but I still have my old machines and things like that we used to record to, you know. But yeah, the issue is, like, a long time ago, musicians used to be good. And you know, everything wasn't a punch-in, and everything wasn't a edit in Pro Tools, and everything wasn't a time alignment. And I'm not saying those are bad things, because I do those things still. I mean, I do those things now, but you know, it's just one of those things where anyone can sound amazing now, because you can draw notes in MIDI and then put it on guitar. Like, no one really has to play anything anymore. But as far as, like, there's still people that care about their quality. Like, you know, if you're running out of a house, you're probably not running, you know, $7,000 EQs on your guitar. So when you want to take that next level, that's where we come into play. When you're just not quite getting what you need out of the house, or that EQ that you're using just doesn't quite cut it, or you know, you're using that amp mod, but you know, you might want the real Engel amp that's, you know, $5,000 on the head. There's still a place for it. You just gotta want it. You gotta want something better than the house recording with Easy Drummer. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Excuse me, it's Superior Drummer. We're doing
Superior
much better. We're springing for the premium product here, Ron. Come on. So that's it. So do you think that the recording studio as we know it is going to become more of this, like, I guess what I'm saying is, do you think the studio for demos and EPs is going to disappear?
Yeah, it's a dead. Unfortunately, it's a dead industry. You know, there's so many kids coming out of recording school, and it's tough to tell them, yo, this is a dying field. I think that you're always going to have a niche market for people like me, or like some of the bigger studios. But I mean, it's just like you can only have one for every 10. You used to be able to have 10, and they all were filled up, and now you have one, and that one has to not only do good work, but they have to be very business savvy. They have to understand how to, you know, navigate the market of even dealing with home studios. You have to know how to integrate with those home studios to stay afloat. If you just shut them all out, you're going to go out of business. But I do think it's a dying world. I got a kid, and I'm you know, I don't know if he wants to do this or not, but it's going to be even tougher for him if he wants to get into this whole world of recording, because it's hard, man. It's hard.
Well, why is it harder than being a musician?
No, nothing's harder than being a musician. Nothing's hard, because in the recording world, you could do commercials, you can do books, you can do, you know, you got 1,000 genres you can record. But the hardest thing in the world is either being a death metal, black metal musician, or like a jazz musician. And that's it. That you're probably never going to make a living doing that unless you're, you know, Cannibal Corpse, and even those guys, you know, I used to know like Alex Webster and all those guys pretty well, and even back in the heyday of death metal, they were delivering pizzas when they weren't on tour. Mm-hmm. And they're the biggest band in the world. So unless you're Danny Filth and you got a marketing company where you market your own T-shirts and you put naked vampire women on them, it's tough, man. Being a musician's tough, you know. I mean, you can be Arch Enemy and throw a girl up front and try to take that route, but in general, man, people are just not making that money. You know, it's hard being a musician.
Well, I think that's kind of an interesting conversation in and of itself, is, you know, especially as a guy that's done a lot of, you know, I've done a lot of music over the years. It's always just been local, so I've never really gotten anywhere with it, but I've also never had any delusion that it was going to become a full-time job for me. But I still run into a lot of people who seem to be laboring under the impression that, you know, playing death metal is going to pay the bills. And I think that a lot of people, you know, it's a little bit different for me because, you know, I live down here in Tampa, which has this huge legacy of death metal, including guys that were able to make it their jobs. But do you think that the genre itself of like death or black metal, or maybe just music as a whole, it's just not a viable route anymore? I mean, I think for death or black metal, it's almost certainly not. I don't think we're ever going to get back to the point of, 1994, a few guys paying their mortgages with it.
Yeah, it's not a viable way to make a true income. And like you said, those guys, they're paying their mortgages, but are they living a lifestyle? Some people are comfortable with a certain lifestyle, and that's all they need is to pay their mortgage. Some people are not comfortable with that lifestyle, but you're never going to have that super comfortable lifestyle playing death or black metal. And it's funny, my new bass player, he's a younger guy, and it's funny when he came into the fold. I think he might have been under the impression that, yeah, this is what it is, and we can make this work, and we can make a living, and we can do this. And I'm not saying you can't. You can scrape by and you can get it done, but I think he found out pretty fast, like, no, this is not really going to pay your bills, man. This is something you do for the pure love of it, and we could all just sell out tomorrow and go play rock and roll, or we can go play pop, or we could do whatever we want. But we play it for the love of it, man, and that's what you got to do when you're playing this genre. You better just be into it, because if you're not, you might as well go play a different form of music.
Yeah, no, firmly agreed. And even those other forms of music aren't great at it. Mm-hmm. So speaking of passion projects, let's pivot for a second over to Aurora Borealis, which is a project that I've listened to for a fair number of years now, but we've never really talked about much on the show. So just for our listeners who aren't familiar, could you give a little background on that and what Aurora is all about?
So Aurora started way back in 1995. Where I just quit another band, and they were just doing a sort of a thing that I didn't like. All the guys in the band were good, but I started my own project, and it's funny that you're down there in Tampa, because that's where Aurora sort of got its start. We recorded our first demo, our first CD, which was an EP called Mansions of Eternity, down there with Scott Burns in More Sound Studios, and that was a wonderful experience. And the first drummer in that band was a guy right down there from Tampa, Tony Laureano, and he played on the first record, and he played on another record later called Relinquish. And so that's a very old project. We're like 9 or 10 CDs deep now. We've been around the scene forever, probably skipped record labels 4 or 5 times, and that's always been my project, and it's always been a super high level of caliber of musicians. I've worked with some of the best drummers in the world, like Derek Roddy, Tim Young, Tony Laureano. I mean, and even my current drummer is amazing. So those guys have all elevated me, and I've tried to surround myself with people that are just, better than me to just keep elevating me more and more. But that's like my main thing. But sometimes I feel like that's too complicated for people, and not that it's so teched out that it's too much for people, because you got bands that are way more tech than that. But it's like the concepts that I'm writing about, the way I'm writing stories, the things that I'm talking about mixed with the music. It's just like it's a passion project for sure, and sometimes I just feel like people don't grasp it or don't get it, or hell, maybe it's just not good enough. Who knows? But,
I would say for Aurora Borealis, it's less a matter of technicality and more a matter of scope. Aurora Borealis records strike me as a certain kind of like big, like epic scope extreme metal record from the 2000s, and you just don't see that kind of thing a whole lot anymore, where it's very dedicated to a concept, very dedicated to high level musicianship, really dedicated to sort of ambition as a principal thing. At least that's what I've always read from Aurora Borealis.
Yeah. Well, you're right. Those records are deep, man. Like lyrically, they are deep. Like if you might brush over them one time and you might be like, well, this is not really saying much. But when you dig in there, it takes me so long to do those lyrics, because like you said, they're big conceptual records, and they all flow. And what's really more in depth about it, you'll have a line from one record, like a line off the Timeline record, that hints to another whole record, and that record will surface 2 years later based off of the one line. You ever watch, like, I'm not into them, but you ever watch a superhero movie and they give you that little preview at the end of the movie? So there's previews on those Aurora records where we'll say a line, and that line is already planned to make a record, 2 years, 3 years down the line, and those lyrics are deep, man. They're spiritual. They're historical. They deal with the universe. They deal with my feelings about the universe, and sometimes they're stories wrapped up into the universe that aren't my true belief, and they're just there for story purposes. But those things run deep, man. I really enjoy the Aurora stuff. It takes me a long time to do that.
Yeah, and thus the necessity of ice to make your weekends a little easier.
Yeah, that's just the fun one, man. But that's the one that people like, man. That's the one they're grasping onto, and we like it too. You know, we think it's awesome.
Gate of God.